Hey everybody, here we have a system that was given to me, and this system is quite strange. Let me explain why. Let's go and start by looking at this label here. It says the system has a 3000 plus AMD Sempron processor, has 256 megabytes of DDR memory, has an 80 gig ID hard drive, CDRW DVD-ROM combo drive, so it can write CDs but it can only read DVDs. But look at the stickers below. Not the same as what we see here. Have a Celeron D processor. Chipset is an ATI Radeon Express 1100. And of course your Windows XP sticker. Now let's have a look inside this thing. We're going to tip it on its side. I previously had a look at it, and let me show you what I found. Somebody has been in this thing, and they have replaced the motherboard, CPU, memory, hard drive, and DVD drive. All of that has been replaced. And apparently it was done by somebody who didn't have a lot of experience with computer engineering. And you'll see why in a moment. Well, first off, look at the fan. They installed it backwards. In a system like this, you only have this fan sucking out air, exhausting it from the system, just like the power supply does. Now, I'm not sure if this CPU core was factored with this motherboard or not. When I previously tested it, it acted like it didn't have a good thermal coupling between the CPU and the heatsink. And then let's move on here. Motherboard is the ECS OEM for HP. It does have an HP part number there, but it's not the original motherboard to the system. The original motherboard was obviously a probably a socket 754 based motherboard. Now these HPs and Compaqs that had, many of them that had socket 754 Semprons used motherboards with an SIS chipset, and they had bad caps and all that mess, and many of those failed. So it explains why this thing has had a motherboard replacement. Now the funny thing is, when you boot this thing up, you don't see HP on the screen. It means they probably disabled the splash screen, which is common. Now let's go ahead and have a look over here. A hard disk drive is not original, as I mentioned. This is a 400 gigabyte Seagate 7200.10 ID hard drive. I imagine somebody probably paid pretty good money for this drive back in its day, considering its IDE and a 400 gig. That's a very high capacity for such an older drive. Now look at the placement of the DVD drive. Normally you find those up here on top, and your expansion bay is like here. But they managed to swap around these two lids to show CD writer blah blah down here instead of up here. Now obviously it says CD writer DB-ROM combo, but we actually have a CD writer DVD writer combo with LightScribe. Pretty nice. And have a look here. This is something else you do not do with IDE setups. You never plug in a hard disk drive and a CD drive into the same cable. And that's because when you do this, your hard disk drive supposedly will operate at the same speed, your DMA as this. Sometimes it may be only PIO mode. On setups like this, you always separate these two. So basically, this motherboard was designed to have an optical disk drive that's through IDE or SATA, but have a SATA hard drive, because I only have one IDE cable hookup and two SATA hookups. So as I mentioned, yeah, they installed the fan backwards, hooked up a IDE hard drive in line on the same cable as a DVD drive or optical drive. You shouldn't do that. And look, they even left this SATA adapter in here. Now, the strange thing here is the sticker says I had an Ultra DMA. Usually, these systems will tell you if they have SATA hard drives. It would usually say, I don't know, SATA rather than UDMA. I mean, yeah, right there, excuse me. But, yeah, that's a strange thing. The system does work, however. And look at this, we have these two cables loose because this motherboard does not have FireWire. Now I guess what we can do now is just go ahead and start up the system. And I can't leave it on for too long because, as I mentioned, the CPU is not properly, or at least the CPU is properly installed, but the thermal paste apparently was not, because it doesn't take long for this thing to get hot, or at least what it reports in the system BIOS. So let's go ahead and plug it up and go into the BIOS and have a look. It has the system has the common best tech power supply you'll find in many HPs, the ATX 25012Z. Sometimes these have issues with capacitors, but other than that, they're relatively reliable. So let's go ahead and start it up. Again, note the fan being installed backwards. To get into this one, you get a setup on this one, you're gonna press F10. It is a HP BIOS. Makes me wonder where this motherboard came from. Hear how the fan's speeding up? There's the model that this motherboard went to. Let me go ahead and jot that down. So SR 2150 NX. I'll have to have a look at that here shortly. Now let's go ahead and look at the order monitor. CPU is running at 60 degrees Celsius. Now let's grab my infrared thermometer and see how hot the heatsink is. (29.4 degrees Celsius). So 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're having very poor transfer. So I'm going to shut this thing off and unplug it, and I'm going to have a look under this heatsink here and see if we even have any thermal paste under there. I'm curious. I do have plans on probably swapping out that CPU for something better if I have something available. What I'll do is I'll look online at that model number I jotted down and look at the CPU support list for that model. See maybe if it'll even support a Core 2 Duo. I don't think I have any of those in stock though. I think I only have maybe Pentium Ds and maybe a Pentium dual core or Celeron dual core. I don't have a whole lot right now. It's always fun to go back and look at somebody else's wonderful computer upgrade. What they done apparently was took a motherboard out of a different HP and stuck it into this Compaq, or maybe another Compaq. Yes, I'm very curious to see what we have under here. It'll probably very well explain why the CPU was overheating. And if you notice, we have very little dust inside this thing. Apparently they knew how to dust out a computer. We did have something here. Now in regards to this, it don't look all that bad. Very strange, I must say. I believe the CPU heatsink was never taken off the board. I'm just guessing maybe the CPU thermal paste maybe got bad over time. So I'm going to clean that off and we'll go from there. CPU is a Celeron D 356. It's probably, I'd say, the equivalent of probably a socket AM2 Sempron processor. For the fact this one's interfacing DDR2 memory. But keep in mind, on Intel systems like this, it's not the CPU that has the memory controller. It's the Northbridge, like the older setups. So anyways, let me go ahead and reapply some thermal compound here. And just to make some of you guys happy, I will use the dot method. I have found that on some heat sinks it works better than doing the spread. Don't need a lot. Let me go ahead and clean off this heatsink. Guess I probably should have used some cleaner on that CPU, but ain't a big deal. This stuff here come off pretty easily. And again, will pretty much be guaranteed an upgrade in cooling performance with this swap alone. So basically, now that we have this swapped out, go ahead and reattach this heatsink carefully. Now some of you guys may be wondering, those who watch my videos often may be wondering why I haven't been posting any part system videos lately. I'll explain that in a later video. Get this screw line up, it'd be nice. I'm gonna take this one loose. Must admit, I've never seen this happen before. Never seen a socket 775 cooler not line up with all four of the screw holes. There, that's better. But yeah, as I was mentioning, I haven't been posting many part system videos, or any in the past while, because Goodwill Computer Works, the store that I always got most of them from, has closed and moved. They didn't move far in the Charlotte area, but they moved far enough to stop me from going there very often. Because now I have to sit through a lot of traffic. I'd have to sit through a lot of traffic to get to it. Again, I'll mention more about that in a later video. Just going to get this CPU cooler reinstalled, because I want to see how the operating system looks, if it even has one. Do some exploring here. I also wonder where they got that 400 gig ID hard drive from. I've never seen a 400 gig ID hard drive before. I think the biggest I've seen was 320 gigs. CPU fan is plugged in and installed. Let me go ahead and double check the screws. Didn't quite torque this one down all the way. Now, I'm going to plug this thing back in and try this out again. Go back into the BIOS and look at the CPU temperature. And use my thermometer to do a little comparison. Apparently this system gives you a very small window of opportunity to get into the BIOS. Still says the CPU's running hot. Let me stall the fan and use my thermometer. See how hot the heatsink's getting. Because I think we may have a bad sensor on this board. Won't be my first time having this happen with HP. The CPU cooler is at about 31 degrees Celsius. Which normally, when you're looking at a Celeron D processor in the system BIOS, that's about typical for their temperatures at idle like that. Now I can physically feel the heatsink getting slightly warm. Let's just go and get out of the BIOS and go into the operating system. See if we can have an operating system on this thing. Hey, it looks like Windows 7 or Windows Vista. Windows 7. System might shut off thinking it's overheating. Notice how the fan keeps cycling up and down. If this thing can even get into Windows, I'll pull up Power Monitor and look at the core temperature if it offers it. Because I think these Intels do have core sensors. Now the temperature you see in the BIOS is actually the sensor you see in the BIOS is what's from the motherboard and not the CPU, and it's password protected. So that means I got to get my Irons disk and hack away into this thing. Now let's go ahead and boot off the Irons boot CD. Make sure the boot settings are correct. Yep, they are. I've done a video like this before on how to get your password, how to reset your password on a Windows 7 system. We're pretty much on a system that uses master boot record and not GPT. Now let's go ahead and restart the computer after I remove the disk from the drive. But before I do, let me go and do one more thermal reading of the heatsink. The heatsink temperature is around 36 degrees Celsius with the fan running slow. So that tells me we are having thermal transfer. I believe the motherboard has a messed up sensor. So let's go ahead and reset. Now we can get into Windows 7. listen to the fan freak out like the system's overheating. Now, as I previously mentioned, how the hard disk drive is hooked up on the same cable as the DVD drive. Notice how long it takes to start up Windows 7 here. Which is, I mean, boot up time is not terrible, but you're generally not supposed to have the DVD and CD, the optical drive and hard disk drive on the same cable. IDE cable. Which is a common rookie mistake among newbies to computer repair. And I question whether this Windows 7 is genuine. But we do have a working install of Windows 7 on this thing. And let's see if we have network access. We do have network access. Says Windows is activated. This must be a Windows loader. Which, if you use that, you'll never have any problems. You usually never will. This mimics an OEM activation, a pre-install activation. Now let's go ahead and pull up our monitor and have a look at our temperatures. That's my biggest concern. I want to see what the CPU core temperature says. So I'm going to go ahead and access my HW monitor file. There it is. And user account is not disabled on this system. Apparently this thing does not give a readout of the CPU core temperature. But again, let me go ahead and stop the fan and see. Right click and start task manager. Make sure the CPU is actually under load. Strange, I must say. I'm going to shut this down. Seeing that it's just pretty much a basic install of Windows 7. I probably should have done a quick bench test of that hard drive, but anyways. I guess I'm going to end this video by looking at our thermal compound. Okay, system is now turned off. I'm going to move the camera over here. Yeah, I must say this system here won't be too hard to upgrade. Slap in 2 gigs of RAM, maybe a better CPU and a SATA hard drive, and put a legit copy of Windows on this thing. This right here will tell us for sure if the thermal sensor on the motherboard is messed up. Because these are delicate little sensors and it can happen. Now as I'm pulling this off, the heatsink is warm to the touch, which tells me there is thermal transfer there. Now anyways, let's go ahead and look up this model here that we got out of the BIOS from this motherboard and see what kind of system it went to. Of course, there's Cube Computer Channel. I guess I'll use that tab there, or no, we'll use a new tab over here on the other display. CSR 2150 NX. See what it says on HP's website. Oh, we went to the Germany store. Epic fail. How about this one? There, English. CPU is original. It's a motherboard. As I mentioned, the ECS motherboard. One of the 2 memory DIMMs was original. The original hard drive to that system was a 120 gig SATA, so maybe the power supply was swapped too, because notice how I had this SATA adapter still on it? And the DVD burner came out of that system too. So apparently, with the exception of the hard drive, somebody did a swap of hardware from one system to another. Yeah. Everything except for the hard disk drive was swapped. Now anyways, I'm going to mention one more thing about the CPU. Notice, you remember how the fan was throttling up a lot? It wasn't due to an error from the previous person, because the CPU cooler was never removed. And I tried both the dot method and the spread method. The dot method you saw me do the dot method in this video, but later I tried the spread method, and the CPU just flat out overheated. And turns out, what I have determined is this cooler may have a broke spring and one of the tensioners, or the back plate is defective. Basically, this cooler, or something here, either the CPU heat spreader is not flat, or the cooler base is not flat. Something is not right here. But we're going to take this cooler off, and I'm going to grab a razor blade and put it to both the base of the heatsink and the CPU heat spreader to see if one of the 2 are not machined properly. Now this won't be the first time I've seen an Intel processor in the 775 package not properly flat on the spreader. One time I had to take a Core 2 quad and actually had to lap the heat spreader to get it flat, to get optimum heat transfer. Otherwise, the system would just overheat. Now on systems like that, the dot method is a better way of applying your thermal paste. So yes, to you guys who like to say the dot method is better than the spread method, it really depends. You need to use, I would recommend, if you're going to do the dot method install of thermal paste, use a thermal paste that's pretty much really thin. It's not very thick, something that spreads easily, because what you're going to be doing, you're going to be using pressure to spread the spread the paste out. Now notice something here. I told you I just did the spread. We had absolutely zero contact. So that tells me that is practically a red flag right there. Something is definitely not right here, because these two guys should be making contact. I'm going to start out with the cooler first. Because if the cooler is not properly flat, I have another one just like it, I believe. I could just slap on and try again with. Notice something here. I barely see any light at all, so that tells me that the heatsink is flat. How about the CPU? That's kind of hard to tell from here, but yeah, it's very hard to tell for sure. I must say it's quite strange. Both appear to be flat, so it tells me that for some reason these two are just not making contact. And I mean, there's probably like a millimeter of space between the two. Basically, the time I did the spread on this thing, the CPU's thermal protection kicked in and saved it from dying. Now, if I didn't have RAM installed, we would have had another Cooking with Intel episode. Now, let me grab another socket 775 cooler. And looky here. I have another one that is almost exactly the same. I'm going to try this one. So I got to take this mounting bracket off and swap it over. Provided that the screw holes in the existing mounting bracket are the same. Give this a quick cleaning. Obviously it needs it. I think a quick wipe down should be sufficient enough just for this quick testing. See, it looks better now. Let's see if it'll mate to this existing bracket that's under the motherboard. And I think it will. Now, if this thing overheats again, I'm going to be very, very confused. Because, I mean, it's really not often you see this. And trust me, I know. I was kind of bashing on a rookie installer by swapping, by not properly installing the hard drive and not properly installing the fan. But even this would really confuse a rookie computer repair technician. Because you're properly installing your thermal paste, you're properly torquing down the cooler, all that great stuff, but you still overheat. I think we're about to rule it out right now, or maybe not. We'll see. Plug in the fan and we'll go ahead and plug in power and start it up and see how it runs. I know it's kind of hard to see what I'm doing here. And if it runs cool, I'll just leave it be. And of course, I didn't plug the system fan back in. I think we found a problem. Let's go to Advanced Hardware Monitor. We solved the problem, guys. Yeah, we have a defective heatsink. You know, just by looking at it, you wouldn't see that. I will save the fan off of it, but you know. But yeah, I know this video was really all over the place. Kind of like how I do part system videos. You know, do an exploration of the system. But not only did you see a general look over this system, quite unique. You saw you saw how somebody just swapped the guts out of an RHP to this system, and who knows where this hard drive came from. You know, they installed Windows 7, used Windows Loader to activate it, I do believe, or maybe used the actual SLIC on the motherboard. Or then I showed you how to. I briefly show you how to take a password off of a master boot record based Windows 7 install, more or less non-secure boot install, and I diagnosed a faulty heatsink all in one video. So anyways, hope you enjoyed this kind of long but amazing adventure. Anyways, thanks for watching.